Welcome to another episode of #52Needs, and this week we are exploring belonging. And I'm very, very delighted to have with me my friend Dr. Iain Butterworth, who is the founder of Iain Butterworth and Associates, a specialist healthy cities and livability consultancy. Iain is trained in community psychology and provides an interface between policymakers, researchers, and citizens. He has 30 years experience in bringing together community and organizational development, government policy and planning, workforce training and development, and applied research. Throughout his career, Iain has worked in state government, local government, and universities, NGOs, as well as private practice. Iain was a Fulbright Scholar in 2003 and 2017, and has expertise in the WHO Healthy Cities program and the UN Global Compact Cities program. And privately, he loves gardening, music, and making boiled bagels. Welcome, Iain.
Hi, Angela.
Okay, so let's talk about belonging at work. Is that actually something that goes together in one sentence?
Yes, it is. Although I think the fact we need to ask that question says something about our relationship with this notion of work in this late capitalist stage of Western civilization.
Well, we have a pandemic at the moment on top of everything else, so
yeah,
people work from home. It's kind of challenging to create a sense of belonging.
it is. And, it's coincided with my midlife crisis and also establishing my own practice. So talk about the stars lining up or the stars colliding or something. Yeah, it's very interesting. In my own life, I've been driven so much by this search for meaning and identity in the work that I do. It's been a very strong need. And I know that over the different times in my life, people have been a bit surprised about that. And maybe it's a very male thing. I don't know. But I think,
definitely,
when you meet people and their work provides them with so much meaning and identity and satisfaction, pride. I think that's rare now for people to have that opportunity to have that. I'm thinking of artisans and craftspeople and wood carvers and farmers even, and agriculture people that grow beautiful plants or make beautiful food. Clearly there's a lot of that still goes on. But the Karl Marx and all of the sociologists of that era that were reacting against the alienation of the workplace, the industrial world back in the 1800s. We're talking about the alienation that we go to work and do work that alienates us from ourselves and from our communities, has no meaning attached to it. And then we go home and we tune into alienating leisure, or we go and eat some alienating fast food somewhere. I think, the search for meaning, identity, and belonging is huge. And I think it's a very deep human need. And I think maybe what COVID's teaching us is that maybe, I don't know, for many of us, it's hard. I think we're getting tired of trying to expect that we find that in our jobs. Ironically, a lot of the COVID spread in Victoria was from economically disadvantaged people living very precarious lives who were working as privatised security guards in these privatised hotels that were supposed to be providing, privatised. I'm struggling to find the word. Keeping people locked away from the community because of the pandemic.
Quarantine.
I know there's a word for quarantine. Thank you. A lot of that was spread by people that were doing that during the day and then going off and delivering Uber at night, Uber Eats at night. I can't, and very little meaning in their lives, but economically just having no opportunity but to keep working.
Okay. All right. Since we're talking about belonging, let's get back to belonging, because look, meaning and belonging are totally linked, because when people have meaning at work and they have a sense of belonging, people thrive. But can we belong as well in a place where we don't necessarily are physically in the same place? Because there are studies that have said that when people have a really strong sense of belonging at work, they are, and this is the study, they are likely to be 6 times more likely to bring their best selves to work and do better work. So
Wow.
yes, purpose will definitely be part of that as well. But it's that emotional connection that we have. So yes, your guards, they will, the security guards won't have that emotional connection to their work. They're doing it strictly for survival, unless, maybe they like providing safety and security. But that sense of belonging, of working with people towards a common goal, do we still have that?
And as I'm saying this, I'm now reflecting on if those quarantine hotels had delivered really great training, and the culture was one of creating a team and a community of practice of those privatized security guards, then there may have been much more of a sense of belonging, especially if those people's roles in protecting the community from the spread of COVID were maybe more strongly reinforced, and they were, they're valued as people delivering a very, very important service to the wider community had been celebrated and respected more. Yeah, that's where the belonging comes in.
Yeah, but we don't really pay attention to that. I mean, there's a lot of the times when I get asked to do trainings, it's all about increasing efficiency. Belonging or a sense of community doesn't really feature in. And I was just talking actually to somebody who asked me, they said, I've been asked to facilitate something and there's no trust, because we're all in different parts of the world. And I said, have you actually done anything that had nothing to do with the task itself, like where you just got together and got to know each other? And she said, no. Everything is always task focused. And, we don't have time for that. We get together in Zoom meetings and we do our work, and then we disband. So to create a sense of belonging, you actually need to do far more than doing great work together. Great work actually happens when you've got that sense of belonging and that sense of connection.
It's a very good point. And you're reminding me of all the peer education work that I was doing and leading in the 80s and through into the 90s. I was involved in some of the very early HIV education for gay and bisexual men, and the work that was done to create the belonging and the trust at the start of those peer education programs was enormous. And as adults, we learn best when we learn from people that we identify as peers, whose opinions and respect we value. And there's nothing to say that a Zoom meeting, even with people around the world, couldn't build in some of that icebreaker stuff at the start.
Absolutely. And the opportunity to maybe break out and have some more in-depth conversation. Like when I suggest to people, go and make some lunch dates with people, but I don't work with them directly. Yeah, but you have a connection that you sit in meetings all the time. So why wouldn't you want to get to know that person? I don't have time for that. Well, do you have time when problems arise to actually deal with them in that way that, it creates even more problems than if you had said to somebody, hey, you know me, we've connected before. We should be able to sort this out, right?
I remember the notion of communities of practice being a driver in the world of work maybe 10, 20 years ago. The notion that, you created a community of people that were working on a shared goal with a shared sense of purpose and shared drivers. In many ways, it's what this notion of collective impact is all about. It's quite a strong driver now in community development. Yeah. But a sense of belonging is core to that. And it's actually not that hard to create, I think, if you actually build the time at the start to create the relationships and the reciprocity and the shared meaning and the shared symbols of belonging and a common sense of achievement. It shouldn't be that hard.
Well, it depends, I think, on this. Personally, I think it also depends on the size of the company and the organization and your expectations. I mean, I know that the anthropologist Robin Dunbar came up with a number quite a few years ago, I can't remember when, and he said that the size of a tribe used to be about 150 people. After that, it would split.
Mm-hmm.
So the conclusion he drew was that we can have about 150 meaningful relationships in our lives, where we have cognitive focus on being able to recall what we've talked about, have some sort of part in life. But we work in organizations with thousands of people. And at the same time, now we have startups with really small groups where there's lots of passion, lots of purpose, and lots of meaning, as you said, and people really working together. But that sometimes is not enough. So that look, as we're just talking, I'm just,
That's all right.
I'm just wondering if the whole co-working space is not a response to finding the middle ground between solopreneurs like me, who work from home alone, or have a virtual team, and the big companies that are so anonymous that you don't really get to meet anybody unless you make a really conscious effort. So you are in an environment. I mean, co-working spaces are not that big, and I'm wondering if they're all around 150 people, because you can create a community in there.
Yes, you can.
I'm just wondering.
I have a fresh experience of that. Just the other day, I went to visit a friend. She left the corporate world and she established a co-working space in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And what she's noticed is, and I don't know whether COVID's brought this on, but there's been a strong demand for people having more privatized work environments within that co-working space. So she's actually been creating some small sealed off office spaces, mm-hmm. because some people are finding the co-working environment actually quite distracting. It's a fine line, isn't it? Because mm-hmm. the open plan work environments that were meant to solve all of our ills and create a sense of belonging actually created this cacophony of sound and interruption.
Yeah.
And co-working space is sort of meant to be a place to provide a third place where solopreneurs, as you call us, can meet and share stuff. But I think maybe with COVID, they've become repurposed as a place where people can get away from the noise and interruptions at home. So it's actually become a place where people want to work uninterrupted.
Yes. And it's almost like the pendulum swings back and forth, right? It's too much, then it's not enough, now it's too much again. So hopefully we'll get somewhere where we can identify what our needs are around, because last week was solitude. So the need between, that sense of belonging and being in community, and then have that need for solitude to be able to get to tune out that cacophony of voices, to be able to focus on the self and being able to hear yourself think. I know that I need that. So,
I used a co-working space at one point, but I found I was working next to some guy that was running a social enterprise, very important work, but he had no concept of how loud and intrusive his voice was.
Yeah.
So I swapped that for the sound of the dishwasher and the washing machine again. I went back to work at home.
Yeah, it's finding the middle ground. It's finding, what works. That's why a lot of people have this sense of, a few days at work, a few days at home. And again, that sense of belonging is really important. People go back into the office because there's a culture. And I just actually participated in a poll to find out what was most important, when people went for a job. And it turned out it wasn't the perks or anything. It was the culture. People wanted a healthy workplace culture. And that is that sense of belonging, where you get that, I'm not just going here for work. I'm going here because I can connect and I can be my authentic self. That's when people really, really thrive.
It's funny because my earlier riff, I was talking about alienation at the workplace. And I do think having work that's meaningful is really, really important. But even if it's not that meaningful, I think having a culture that creates meaning and where there's a sense of camaraderie, and the management structure acknowledges that maybe the work's a bit tedious, but they create opportunities for doing different types of work at different times during the week, or having some sort of diversity of experience, but also having a team camaraderie where it can make up for some of the mundanity in the actual tasks.
Yeah.
I think is really important.
Yeah, it's It's the ability to create experiences, as you said, that are memorable, you know, not where you go in and you just do the same thing every day and there's no meaning behind it, but you go in and you've got that sense of community and that sense of connection, and then it doesn't matter.
I mean, we spend the traditional way of, well, the industrial world's way of working is, you know, 8 hours a week minimum. And that's a huge amount of our waking time that we spend with people that otherwise we'd never spend our time with. So I think creating meaning and a place to belong is very, very important. And if we do it well, we can take some of those relationships with us throughout our lives. I mean, I'm still friends with people that I worked with 35 years ago. But that's because those people really went out of their way to create a respectful culture and shared something of themselves with me. Created a culture where we could do that. It was respectful and collegiate, but also allowed us to bring our other parts of our lives into that workplace somehow.
And I generally say it's not about, you don't have to take people home for the barbecue on the weekend to create that sense of belonging and to build trust. But it's about sharing something of yourself that goes beyond the task execution, that goes beyond, you know, you didn't do this or you did this, and maybe saying thank you. It's the ability to actually say, we're human beings, we have emotions, we want to have interactions with each other that go beyond the, as I just said, the task execution, but that, and as you said, that create meaning. We're going back to meaning. Sorry, I interrupted you about meaning before, but you know, like I just thought, what meaning? You're absolutely right. Meaning is totally connected to this. You can't really separate the two, can you?
No, and I think the reason I ultimately left working in government was I just couldn't handle any more what's called machinery of government changes and rebranding and restructuring, and sort of being forced to go along to these new organisational structures and do the team building and do their visioning and do this and that. And there was a sense of meaning lacking from it, because it felt like window dressing that was more about branding rather than actually dealing with the deep social issues that were supposedly driving this work, you know? And I witnessed a certain amount of alienation in those bureaucratic environments. And I think the notion that people would have a job for life where they could invest the meaning in their role in a government bureaucracy as experts and as people that really cared about that, like, those people are still there. But I think there's a lot of people just hanging in there by the skin of their, you know, by their fingernails in some ways, and somehow managing to withstand the endless restructuring and changes of policy. And I mean, American government organizations at least keep their names forever. There's a housing and urban development department in the US that's been there for 60 years. How many of Australia's bureaucracies keep their names for 5 years or more? I mean, I know that sounds superficial and maybe a bit churlish, but for me, it's that continuity that allows people to create that belonging, because at least you can say, I belong to this organization.
But, you know, changing names is one thing, but, you know, people change companies all the time at the moment. There is no continuity. So whether the company has a name for 1 or 2 years, that's great if they keep that. But the gig economy, you know, where people move from job to job to job, is getting worse and worse, because people don't create that sense of belonging anymore, and they don't find meaning, and they don't have purpose, so they move to the next thing. And when you've got a transient community that changes all the time, and you don't create that team, and you don't create that structure that holds a team together, then you can't really develop a sense of belonging. So what does that
really interesting? Yeah, it's really interesting what you say. I read recently this notion of ghosting, right? Last year I applied for a lot of mainstream jobs during COVID as some sort of, you know, life raft experience for myself. And I would get these automated responses, even from international NGOs that were anchored very deeply in a social purpose. You know, you go onto their website and it's all about meaning and solving some of life's most wicked problems. But then when you went for a job with them, you'd get this automated thing back saying, if you haven't heard from us within 3 weeks, you must assume that you haven't been successful.
Yeah.
The social contract, even for applying with these NGOs that were all about the social contract, it had gone. And what's happening in America now is the ghosting is happening 2 ways. Young folks who have grown up in this dislocated environment of being treated like objects in the gig economy are simply not turning up to work anymore. They just disappear. They don't turn up for work. They don't respond to their emails afterwards. They don't answer their phone, and they ghost their employer.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the flip side of being treated as a thing, as a unit of work.
Yeah.
I was really surprised when I read that. I had never expected that to happen, but in some ways I kind of approve it in a way. Or not approve it, but I can understand it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's no, I mean, we've talked about this before. When you have a sense of in order to build a sense of belonging, there has to be some reciprocity. There has to be that sense that I'm giving something and you're giving something back. We've talked about neighborhoods. You know, how important it is to have a neighbor who actually interacts with you, even if it's just, it's not living in each other's pockets, but it's the sense of support. And when the sense is that the expectation is that the person has to give at work and give and give and give, but there's not that much coming back. Or again, I mean, it depends on the expectations in general. But when the expectations are so far apart that there's no coming together and that sense of belonging never develops, then why stay around? There's no need. So I'm really curious with everything that we've got happening at the moment, you know, working from home, connecting on Zoom, but only, you know, I mean, I've met somebody who runs 2 Zoom meetings at the same time.
What?
Yeah. So let's not go there, but that sense of we're not really connecting as people anymore, and people don't really know how to create that environment where people have that sense of belonging, because everything is just so task focused. There's no tailored communication. It's just all generalized. Information gets passed on through what's it called, Slack channels or other, you know, apps. There's no personal communication anymore. I wonder where we're heading.
I've participated in some really great meetings in the last couple of weeks, actually. The United Nations Association of Australia held a forum last week or the week before around the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I loved about it was everyone who participated. I helped to chair, to facilitate a couple of breakout meetings. And we all shared where we were coming from, where we were based in terms of Aboriginal nations. So I was able to say, I'm speaking to you from Dja Dja Wurrung country in central Victoria. And I loved that because A, it anchors us to place in a way that First Nations people have never forgotten.
Yes.
And B, it acknowledged and celebrated the Indigenous, ongoing Indigenous nationhood of Australia. But it also helped us to start relating to each other in slightly different ways as Western people, by bringing the place by bringing place and belonging at a geographical level into these Zoom meetings. I was impressed, and I found it really heartwarming.
That sounds
so maybe that is a way to sort of bring the community of belonging to place into these Zoom meetings by even sharing stories about where we're from.
Yeah. Again, do we want to share personal information? We share all sorts of stuff on social media and LinkedIn and, you know, but we don't necessarily talk to people about what really matters. So I think we may have to redefine what belonging means in the 21st century. That would be my conclusion.
That's a very good question, and a very interesting statement. There's so much embedded in that. We could talk for hours about what that might actually mean.
Because community, places, villages, I mean, like all of these things have changed meaning in the last 50 years completely. So yeah, okay, well, as you said, we can talk about this for hours. Let's do that at another point. And thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I look forward to seeing you soon. And thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Angela.